If your team isn't using ClickUp, you're wasting time, and data proves it. 61% of knowledge workers manage work more than doing it, switching apps 1,000 times a day. That's work sprawl and costs millions. ClickUp replaces 20 apps with Convergence, uniting projects, docs, and chats, while AI super agents handle the busy work. Join 4 million teams using ClickUp to finish work 30% faster. Try it free and get 15% off AI upgrades at clickup.com/podcast. That's CLICKUP.com/podcast.
By this point in the year, routines are real, not aspirational. And when it comes to supplements you're taking every day, trust really matters. But choosing the right supplements can be confusing, especially in a low-regulation space, which means a lot of products cut corners, skip testing, or don't fully disclose what's inside. That's exactly why I choose Momentous. They've become the high-trust brand in a low-trust category. They weren't satisfied with the industry standard, so they built the Momentous standard. Their commitment to doing things the right way, not the easy way. What truly sets Momentous apart is their testing and transparency. Every product is independently certified by NSF for sport, meaning it's tested for contaminants, heavy metals, banned substances, and verified for label accuracy. So you always know exactly what you're putting in your body. And if a product doesn't meet their standard, it never hits the shelves. Right now, Momentous is offering our listeners up to 35% off your first order with promo code ACAST. Head to livemomentous.com and use promo code ACAST for up to 35% off your first order. That's livemomentous.com, promo code ACAST.
Today's episode is brought to you by Amantara. Amantara is an education-first plant and mushroom wellness brand, and they specialise in providing dietary supplements that can aid your well-being. Amanita muscaria is a legal mushroom that is traditionally associated with relaxation and nervous system calm. As somebody who has issues around anxiety and sleep, I am always looking for dietary supplements that may aid in reducing the levels of anxiety that I experience and just make my brain feel a little bit calmer. Amanita is used by adults all over the US as part of a wind down or evening routine. Amantara is a brand that emphasises transparency, responsible use and education. Their website is full of information about Amanita muscaria and its potential benefits. As with any dietary supplement, it is incredibly important to consult your medical provider before trying it. To learn more about Amanita muscaria and Amantara's approach, visit amantara.com. That's amantara.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 308 of Real Life Ghost Stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Beth H62, Jen Usler, and Sylvie K. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week, our film review is Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. Behind the Mask was released in 2006. It has 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 76% on Rotten Tomatoes. Nice, normal-looking Leslie Vernon has an obsession with movie-style slashers like Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger. Leslie decides to follow in the footsteps of his heroes and, ever the self-promoter, invites a documentary filmmaker and her crew to follow him as he constructs his own grisly legacy. I think what that synopsis misses out is the fact that in this film, the world of Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, that's all real. So those men are real, those killers are real, and their stories are real. They happened in real life, and Leslie Vernon is determined to be the next Michael Myers, you know. And at this point, I'd like to give a shout out to Sinead from The Poisoner's Cabinet, who recommended this film to me. I had never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it, and she recommended that I watch it. And I watched it yesterday, and you know what? I thought it was pretty decent. In terms of my likes for this film, I thought the guy who plays Leslie Vernon was brilliant. I loved his performance, and I think that the film is worth watching just for his performance alone, because he is just a normal average guy, and he's here trying desperately to ensure that he is the next big teen slasher serial killer. And there's points when it's really funny. Like, he talks about the process of the planning. He talks about how he has to find a virgin, and he just knows when somebody's a virgin. He's doing loads of cardio because he's like, well, I got to do a lot of running around after people and then not be out of breath when I catch them. He's like, but also I have to be able to do that whole, slow walk thing that's actually really fast, because no matter how much you run, you can't get away from them. Like, it's funny. It's very self-referential. It's very meta. It is entertaining to watch, and it really breaks down all of the tropes of the 90s and 2000s teen slasher films. And Robert Englund is in it, who plays the Ahab, which is the good character. Robert Englund was the original Freddy Krueger, so that was great to see. And then the lady who plays the psychic in Poltergeist is the librarian in it. So, there's lots of great nods to old slasher films, and it was really entertaining to watch. And I thought they did the mockumentary style really, really well, and it really worked for this. I was just very entertained by this idea that this man is like talking them through kind of, hey, this is how you go about becoming the next big slasher. And, it's absurd, but you're living in that world, and it's entertaining to watch. A couple of weeks ago, I watched the film Shelby Oaks, and I was complaining about how badly they had done the transition between mockumentary and horror film. And I thought this film did the transition between mockumentary and horror film really well. So the first 2/3 of the film is a mockumentary, right? And the last third of the film, we end up, or the crew end up in the horror film. And I thought it was done really well, because they didn't try to do it subtly. They were just like, boom, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going. And I think if you're going to do a big transition like that, where you're going to kind of change points of view of the film, you've got to just own it. You've got to just straight up do it, own it. Don't try and make it subtle, and make it a part of the story. And I really do think that if you like 90s and early 2000s slashers and 80s slashers, you'll love the nods and the rituals and the references in this film. You really will. It's very entertaining. They talk through all of the ingredients that go to make up the perfect slasher film, and how to be the perfect bad guy, and how to develop your own legacy, your own backstory. And do you know what? It's very fun. And Leslie Vernon is a great character, because he's incredibly likeable. And then you're like, oh no, hang on a second, I forgot that he's planning all these awful things. But he is incredibly likeable, and that makes him a really interesting character to watch. And in terms of dislikes, right, there's something really obvious that I disliked about this film. And I think that the old slashers, the old teen horror movies, were completely riddled with like a deep misogyny, right? And I think that was part of the trope, right? The girl who was having sex, or the fella who was having sex, they'd be killed first, and there was always the virgin is the final girl, all that jazz. But I really struggled still with the misogyny and the over-sexualization of the teenage girls in this. And look, I know it happened in those slashers. We know that in those paranormal slashers, in those people slashers, whatever they are, we know that there was misogyny and there was over-sexualization, and that was part of the trope. And maybe this film was just leaning into it, but I don't know. I feel like maybe there was a less explicit way to explore it, or there was a way to explore it that was, kind of interesting, or turned it on its head, or made some sort of intelligent commentary about it. There's only one moment in the film where I felt like they made commentary about it, which is where one of the girls says, what, just because I'm sexually active that I'm going to die? That's about the only moment where I thought, okay, well that feels a bit more analytical of the how problematic that was. There were so many moments that made me wince, where there was really explicit sex scenes, and then lots of references to the fact that the girls were 17, that they were teenagers, and the documentary makers in it, the mockumentary makers, they frequently talk about the girls in a really sexual manner. There's like shots, like upskirt shots and stuff, which just gave it made me feel deeply uncomfortable, right? And I was just like, oh God, this is not making a commentary on any of this actually, and it's quite difficult to watch. And to be honest, I know I said that the transition from mockumentary to full-on slasher was seamless, and I did think it was seamless. I didn't enjoy the slasher part of the film. I didn't enjoy the last third of the film as much as I enjoyed the mockumentary. I thought the mockumentary was brilliant. I thought it was really clever, really entertaining to watch. And how many times can I say entertaining in one film review? There's a great moment in the mockumentary bit where they go and see an old retired slasher villain, and he's living with like his trophy wife, and he's given it all up, you know, and they're talking about the old days of slashers. Like, all that stuff in the mockumentary really entertained me. And watching the documentary filmmakers become more and more involved in the process itself was clever. But the actual last third of the film, where it turns into a full-on slasher, I just got bored. I didn't think it worked. I didn't enjoy the actual slasher as much as I enjoyed the mockumentary. And I just thought the last third of it dragged because of that. I don't like the cat and mouse elements of slasher films anyway. I get bored. I'm like, right, well, we kind of know how this is going to go, how this is going to play out, so let's just get there. And I did think this film suffered from that. But fundamentally, I'm surprised I haven't engaged with this film before this. Again, thanks to Sinead from The Poisoner's Cabinet for putting me on to it. And I really thought if you're a fan of that genre, this is a film that you will absolutely love. I'm not a massive fan of the genre, but I still appreciated the thought that went into it, and I appreciated the script, and I appreciated the work that had gone into making the characters more nuanced and enjoyable to watch. Did think the last third dragged, and there was bits of it that made me wince. But I'm going to give this film 3.5 stars. So that's 3.5 stars for Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
If your team isn't using ClickUp, you're wasting time, and data proves it. 61% of knowledge workers manage work more than doing it, switching apps 1,000 times a day. That's work sprawl and costs millions. ClickUp replaces 20 apps with Convergence, uniting projects, docs, and chats, while AI super agents handle the busy work. Join 4 million teams using ClickUp to finish work 30% faster. Try it free and get 15% off AI upgrades at clickup.com/podcast. That's CLICKUP.com/podcast.
Tired of your car insurance rate going up even with a clean driving record? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry, your proactive insurance assistant. Jerry compares rates side by side from over 50 top insurers and helps you switch with ease. Jerry even tracks market rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Switch with confidence. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/ACAST today.
Why choose a Sleep Number smart bed?
Can I make my site softer?
Can I make my site firmer?
Can we sleep cooler?
Sleep Number does that. Cools up to 8 times faster and lets you choose your ideal comfort on either side. Your Sleep Number setting. Enjoy personalized comfort for better sleep night after night. And now, during our President's Day sale, take 50% off our limited edition bed. Plus, free home delivery with any bed and base. Ends Monday. Only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
Hi, this is Matt from P1 with Matt and Tommy, and this episode is sponsored by eBay. The cars you'll find on eBay are just different. They come with a story that you can't wait to share. Like this 1973 Dodge Charger on eBay that has been tucked away in an Arizona barn for over 40 years, only 55,000 miles, and somehow in great running order. It even has a rare sunroof. Suddenly, a car that was hidden for decades is being delivered in just a few clicks with eBay's secure purchase. All the paperwork handled. There are thousands of cars on eBay, from unique finds like the Pontiac Grand Prix SJ to daily drivers, and now with a new way to buy them. eBay. Things people love.
Which brings us to our story this week. You'll have seen from the title that today we're talking about the Q station in Australia. And this place, has come up so many times in mini episodes where people have gone on paranormal tours, they've been on, historical tours and weird things have happened. It is one of the places that I would love to go to Australia and visit, purely because of the sheer volume of stories I've received about this place over the years. So let's get into it. We are finally talking about the history and the hauntings of the Q station in Australia. In our modern lives, it can be quite difficult to imagine just how much diseases influenced the way people before us lived. Yes, we have had the more recent pandemic that gave us a taste of how debilitating and deadly things can really be when they get out of control. But that was also a time when the global population, for the most part, mainly stood still and weathered the storm. For people of the past, diseases weren't something you always had the time to hunker down from in order to avoid. Life had to keep going. People had to grow, industries couldn't come to a standstill, or they would quickly find themselves replaced with something else. And at the turn of the 19th century, concepts like progress, expansion and industry were well rooted in British hearts and minds. And they had one particular destination that they wanted to execute them in mind: Australia. This is the part of the story where two opposing forces come face to face. On the one side, there is new land ripe for exploitation, and on the other side is disease. When ships loaded to the brim with convicts arrived on the shores of New South Wales, they had spent months at sea, confined in small quarters. Men passed diseases onto each other as easily as they breathed the same air, or had lice and fleas jump from one body to the next. For the new people of Manly on the northern beaches of Sydney, taming the seas was easier than dealing with the almost constant outbreaks of smallpox, influenza or typhoid fever. By 1809, they had constructed possibly the oldest European structures in Sydney, a large stone obelisk on the shore to help guide vessels out of dangerous waters. But it wouldn't be until 1832 that they would make any real progress in their ongoing war with deadly and contagious diseases. Up until then, most of the ships docking in Sydney had been filled with convicts. They were easier to govern and force into quarantine. After all, they were no longer men and women, but objects that could be used at their country's convenience. But as the news of the new settlements began to spread, ships bearing civilians in search of a better future began rolling in. And free men were a bit harder to manage. Firstly, the captains of those ships weren't being employed by the British government, but either belonged to private companies or to themselves. To them, time was money, and being told that they were to house their passengers for another month at port was costing them a fortune in lost earnings, delayed deliveries, and extra wages for their crew. The sea captains were furious, and either unceremoniously dumped their passengers on the docks or later sued the governor of New South Wales for damages. For the most part, the governor could handle a lawsuit or two, but times were changing, and his purse strings were tightening. In 1831, 34 passenger ships carrying hundreds of passengers had docked in Sydney. In 1832 alone, that number had risen to 63, and now those in charge of New South Wales had to deal with the ongoing dilemma of highly contagious diseases and testy captains who were unwilling to wait out the quarantine period in order to stop the spreading of them. The first thing to do was to put a mandatory quarantine period into law, so that captains would be forced to deliver their passengers to designated locations. And the second was to make the best out of the situation. Wanting to mitigate the tensions with litigious captains, a series of facilities, mainly consisting of pitched tents and a cabin to begin with, were put up at North Head. It was here that passengers could be offloaded and housed while they underwent medical examinations and waited for their quarantine period to be over. The ships that had brought them would then be free to carry on their way without further delay. Slowly but surely, the North Head quarantine station began to take shape. Pitched tents were replaced by dorms, stone showers, medical facilities and supply stores. It could house up to 150 people at any given time, which actually posed a problem when the Bijapur arrived in 1853 with over 1,000 passengers on board. 55 people had already died on the long voyage, and a further 62 died during their stay at Q Station and its, once again, makeshift facilities. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of visitors, management at the station had procured a ship and converted it into a hospital on the docks. But many passengers were still forced to live in pitched tents or were simply left, exposed to the elements. These were dark times for Q Station, and they were only about to get darker. Measles, scarlet fever and typhus fever ran rampant and threatened to spill into the establishing communities of New South Wales if those at the facility did not do their jobs properly. In an attempt to get ahead of things, the stone showers were converted to dispense carbolic acid instead of water. Passengers were forced inside the showers and under the acid, thinking that it would rid them and their bodies of any pathogens that they may have brought with them on the ships. Many, especially those who did suffer from diseases like smallpox, would have gone in with sores and open wounds and have their conditions worsen. The acid wasn't strong enough to kill, but it would eat away the top few layers of skin. Those who had gone into the showers would find their skin peeling and flaking away like they were suffering from severe sunburn over the following few days. But a different fate awaited those who refused to go into the showers at all. There are reports of passengers being shot as they attempted to run from the showers. Those in charge believed that they were doing the right thing. There was no guarantee that the ones trying to flee were not infected, and they had the potential to end entire communities if they were and got away. The same was believed of some of the women who showed signs of mental illnesses or were simply believed to be of bad stock. There were multiple cases of forced sterilisation, with most of the procedures taking place in the hospital facilities that had originally been constructed to heal the sick. It was only the thought of these wayward women that eventually convinced those in charge to update the facility to accommodate its new number of inhabitants. Over 200 unmarried women had been aboard the Bijapur when she'd made port in Sydney, and now there were major concerns over what would happen if these women were, and I quote, let loose in the bush. Barracks were built to house them, and outside the new addition to the facility ran a double fence manned by sentries to keep any unwanted visitors out and the single women firmly inside. Q Station functioned as a quarantine post cum containment facility for over 50 years, and during that time at least 572 residents died on the site. Though that number is difficult to verify, as many records prior to 1881 have either been lost or destroyed. Many believe that the number of deaths that occurred at Q Station is actually significantly higher, especially seeing as the land was originally an important site to the Aboriginal people and had already been in use for generations before European settlers took over. There are now 3 cemeteries to house the dead at Q Station, but the original burial grounds were levelled and the gravestones moved to different locations as the facility grew. So there is no way to say for certain who rests where at Q Station, although, if reports are to be believed, not everyone who has remained at the station is resting. Q Station, for its tragic and hostile history, is often believed to be one of the most haunted locations in Australia. No 2 visitors to the site ever share the exact same experiences, and yet there seem to be some faces and names that appear in reports over and over again, and they seem to be concentrated in a few key locations. The first is the former hospital. It was dark, one visitor later wrote about the building. Dank and suitably creepy. One of the tables appeared to be covered in deep scratches. I asked our guide why. Many of the patients, he said, were held down on the table when receiving painful treatments. Many of those patients and procedures would have been overseen by the matron, the head nurse, still said to keep an eye on the facility, and those who dare to wander inside it even to this day. Tour guides and staff members will warn you that the matron isn't kind. She is known to make her presence known by attempting to scare off intruders or by making them feel lightheaded or nauseous. The matron likes things to be a certain way, and when things don't go exactly the way she wants them to, she will punish those who do not respect her or the hospital she once ran. And supporting the matron in her endeavours are two other nurses still believed to be on duty. Nurse Elizabeth McGregor and Nurse Annie Egan were both at the facility when there was an outbreak of the Spanish flu. But rather than run for safety, both women continued to tend to the sick. Nurse Elizabeth McGregor had also served in World War I, and after losing her life at Q Station, she was buried with full military honours. But Annie Egan's fate would be much more tragic. Nurse Annie volunteered to take care of the returning veterans who had been struck down by the Spanish flu. But it would only be a few days before she contracted the virus herself. It all happened so quickly. One day she was perfectly fine and healthy. 6 days later, she was on her deathbed, and being a nurse, Annie understood that she was dying. She had only one final request. Annie was Catholic, and she begged for a priest to deliver the last rites to her and the other Catholics who were dying at Q Station. Those in charge, fearing that it would spread the disease even further, refused. And Annie unfortunately passed away later that day without her dying wish being granted. Paranormal investigators have recorded audio tapes with an eerie voice saying, "Annie," whilst at the hospital. They have also recorded someone else telling them to get out. Those on tour at Q Station will often start at the hospital and then move on to the building ominously known as the Grave Diggers' Cottages. Dating from 1840, it is the oldest building on the site. But despite its rather forthcoming name, it's not exactly clear who lived in the building or what they were used for. It was potentially an administration building rather than being the homestead for the on-site grave diggers. But the rumours that surround the cottage paint a very dark picture of what it could have potentially been used for. So the stories go. Two evil doctors who took sick delight out of torturing helpless residents once called the building home. Inside the place, one visitor later wrote, had a weird muggy energy. It was very hot, and I actually started to feel a little sick and dizzy. Tour guides will warn you before entering that this can happen, and they will tell you exactly who is making you feel that way. Samuel and Martin. Perhaps they were once evil doctors, or perhaps they were once gravediggers. But what remains seems to be two spirits who have a bit of a temper. Martin is the quiet one. But Samuel, like his counterpart, the matron over in the hospital, doesn't like visitors. Cupboard doors and drawers will fling open, intentionally hitting visitors in an attempt to scare them away, especially if they are women. Listening through a ghost box, paranormal investigators have recorded the ghostly voice of a man telling them to go away, and followed with the word witch. I was feeling the floor vibrating, the investigator later reported. But strangely, almost like the floor was humming, witches came out again. Most of what was coming out was mainly leave and enough. According to the tour guides and staff, the angry ghost of Samuel was once a gravedigger who lived in the cottage. They have reported being poked and prodded in the sides whilst inside the building. They have also witnessed a chair drag itself across the dining room floor and seen objects throw themselves across the room to smash into the walls. Pictures taken inside the building show what appears to be a claw or a clawed hand reaching across the dining table. But that's not all. There are several pictures depicting what appeared to be hooded figures, and hooded figures are very common at Q Station. They never seem to stay in just one place, but are often seen darting from building to building in the shadows. A tour guide giving a sleepover tour was once woken up at 5 a.m. to the sound of 3 loud knocks above her head. When she opened her eyes, she saw a dark hooded figure standing at the foot of her bed that slowly disappeared into the night. Those on that very same sleepover tour, like many others who visit the site, would then probably end up in the next hotspot for paranormal activity. The dreaded showers. There, many people have reported hearing whispers or experiencing cold spots, but they have also experienced extreme nausea or the sensation that their skin is either itching or on fire. I was starting to think, one visitor wrote, that the Q station, supposedly one of the most haunted sites in Australia, was all a bit of a beat-up, until we reached the shower block at the very end of the tour. We gathered around in almost complete darkness. I can't remember what the light source was used, but it was just enough for us to see each other's faces. The guide was explaining what went on in those old-fashioned stone showers back in quarantine days. The pain and the horror of the chemical washes. I was listening with interest until suddenly, and completely out of nowhere, I began to feel lightheaded and cripplingly sick. My whole body was overwhelmed, my knees started to buckle underneath me and I thought I was going to throw up. I started to sway but I couldn't speak. It wasn't a normal faint feeling, it was like something foreign and malignant. I can't explain it any better than that. Instantly, the guide stopped talking and locked eyes on me. In a calm voice that suggested he had seen this before, he said, "There is a man behind you. He's trying to get inside your body. You're okay. Just acknowledge that he is there and he will go away." It's hard to describe, but all I know is that my petrified brain formed the silent words, "I know you are there." And in a split second, the dizziness and the nausea completely vanished. And that was that. There are no recorded deaths that took place in that exact location. Reports say that it is often a man or a young girl who are seen around the shower blocks. The man will often cause that sense of nausea in visitors, but the girl will often appear and complain that she doesn't want to get inside the showers. It could be that both the man and the young girl were subjected to the acid showers in life, and it, understandably, made a lasting impression on them. Perhaps it was one of the last things they ever experienced before succumbing to some disease or other hardship, or it is maybe the last clear memory that they have before they crossed over, and now they still haunt the location in death. In the 50 years that Q Station was active as a quarantine facility, improvements in disease treatment and management made screening processes like it more and more obsolete, until finally there was no need for it at all. Q Station has since been converted into a hotel, conference centre and restaurant. And in a place that was once marred with tragedy, people now get married or have romantic getaways in whitewashed cottages with harbour views. It seems like the story of Q Station has gone from one extreme to the other. And who knows what will happen to it next. The history of the Q Station is... it's rough, right? It's rough to listen to. And I think it's always easy to imagine in these scenarios that all of the doctors and nurses were evil, that everyone was bad. But for the most part, I always like to think that people were trying to do their best with the information that they had readily available to them at the time period. By modern standards, it's barbaric, right? But you have, I think you, in some world, it's the same with any of the old asylums that we talk about or tuberculosis hospitals. For the most part, I think people thought they were doing their best and doing the right thing. There were obviously people who categorically were not there to do their best and do the right thing. There were people, as with anywhere where there are vulnerable people, there will be people who will show up to places like that in order to take advantage of vulnerable people, whether that is, to abuse them or to just exert their power or have a feeling of being more powerful. It does happen, unfortunately. And I think places like the Q Station, they grow out of necessity and in a way panic, because there's this feeling of these ships are full of diseases and they are bringing diseases to Australia. How the heck do we stop that from happening? And in the 1800s in Ireland, these ships were referred to as coffin ships because so many people didn't make the journey, whether they were going to Australia or whether they were going to America. People did not make the journey. People did not live. They did not survive. One person gets on that ship with typhoid or with measles or with smallpox or whatever, that is spreading like wildfire because you are wedged onto that ship. You are living on top of each other in each other's filth. So any disease is spreading like wildfire. I am reminded of, if you are Irish and listening to this, you will already know what I'm going to say, which is the series of books called Under the Hawthorn Tree, Wildflower Girl and Fields of Home, which are 3 books about 3 children who survive the Great Hunger in Ireland and then what happens to them afterwards. And one of the girls goes to America on a coffin ship, and there's, a description of her time on the ship, and it is truly, truly harrowing. And these were children's books, by the way, just to be clear, children's books. Can highly recommend them if you want to learn more about the Great Hunger and, about what life was like for Irish people afterwards. And I think it's also important to remember that when we're talking about convicts, right, convicts being sent to Australia, for example, we think of convicts and we think they're all murderers and rapists and terrible people who've done absolutely hideous, morally hideous things. And actually, sometimes they weren't. I have a relation, Valentine Ozenbrook, who was sent to Australia many, many moons ago, many generations back. And the reason he was sent to Australia was for stealing lead from the roof of a church. And he was transported off to Australia for that reason. So not everybody who was sent to Australia was this raging, hardened criminal doing awful things like murder. And obviously there were also small children that were sent to Australia as well. The Catholic Church, for example, they did send children off to Australia in order to build churches, in order to build monasteries, convents, etc. in Australia. So children were also sent, and it wasn't just horrible, murderers. It was women, children, men, and it wasn't great. Like, it really wasn't great. And the amount of misery and disease. And I all I could think about during that as well, right, is I'm very pale skinned. And I've lived in the southeast of England for the last 13 years. And as a result, my skin has gotten a bit more used to the sun. So now, I wear sun cream every day. And I now get a slight tan in the summer. But if I was suddenly if I'd gone from England or Ireland and I was launched into the Australian sun, imagine how horrific that would be on your skin. Imagine the sunburn. The level of sunburn would be out of this world, and then you're having these chemical baths, chemical showers that they think are just going to kill all of the bacteria and diseases and pathogens that are on your body. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And I think places like Q Station, I know that obviously there's no record of people dying in the shower or whatever. I think that places like Q Station absorb the misery of the people that are in them. And imagine the misery of those showers, the trauma, the fear, the physical pain, the mental pain. This would be men, women and children stripped naked, put into a shower, and then the liquid that comes out of the shower is an acidic mixture which peels the first couple of layers of your skin off. Of course, you're not going to want to go in. Of course, you're going to fight. Of course, you're going to be worried, terrified, scared. And I feel like places like the Q Station absorb that energy. I also can barely even talk about the fact that 200 unmarried women were locked away because how could they possibly be let loose in the bush? There is so much to say about that. But if I start, I will not stop, and I will rant forever. But that is a pretty grim thing to think about. And, never mind the fact that already there were Aboriginal people in Australia. There were people who were living on that land who suddenly were like, oh, sorry, this isn't ours anymore. What are you talking about? Oh, we have to move because you want to build a town and a quarantine station. Okay, right, well, cool. All of our history and culture and heritage, we'll just forget about that, will we? Oh, right, cool, no worries. And our sense of place and belonging. Don't even get me started. And I also have to be a bit cynical or a bit skeptical for a second. Not cynical, that's not the right word, just a bit skeptical. I think it's very interesting that a lot of the feelings that people report feeling in Q Station are of nausea and lightheadedness, right? And I think there is a possibility that this may be to do with the fact that on these tours, you are hearing about these awful physical abuses that happened to these people. So, for example, you're being told, a table's covered in deep scratches, and you're being told, well, patients were held down on the table when receiving treatments. That's why. And of course, that I think personally that some of these feelings of nausea and lightheadedness, equally the hearing about the showers, standing in the dark, hearing about the pain of the chemicals, I think it's possible that that is actually just a physiological response to the anxiety that is induced by hearing about those awful things that happened to people. And you're hearing about awful physical things, which can make people have a very physical reaction to something, even if they don't necessarily have that kind of reaction to physical things on a general day-to-day basis. There's a big difference between watching something on a film and then standing in that very spot and being told, in this very spot, people were held down while they were receiving painful treatments. Here you can see the scratches on the walls. In this very spot, people were given chemical showers, and this is the type of pain that they would have been in. I think that there's a possibility that some of these feelings of nausea and lightheadedness and feeling like you're going to puke immediately could be from the actual physiological response of hearing those awful things that happened to people. Do I think, though, it's really interesting that when this person was in the shower room, they had that feeling until the tour guide was like, you've just got to acknowledge the man that's behind you and then it'll stop. They acknowledged the man behind them and then it stopped. Could that be psychosomatic? Yes. But is it kind of weird? Yes. Also, I think fundamentally the Q station for me is one of those places where I feel like if anywhere is going to be haunted, it's going to be there. A bit like, Waverly Hills, that there is so much trauma, sadness, emotion that has been absorbed by that building. I think, if there was anywhere that was going to be haunted, I think that's a pretty good place to start. And not necessarily just the people arriving on the boats, whether they were civilians or convicts. They had come from their own country to a completely new country on a ship for whatever amount of months that was absolutely horrific, filthy, full of disease. And then you're quarantined for that period of time and you're terrified and you're having chemical showers and you're with strangers. Terrifying, but also for the staff. I don't believe that, the staff there are all evil. And I think sometimes those stories grow as the legends about a place develop over time. Those stories of like evil doctors who are conducting experiments. Pretty much every abandoned hospital, etc., has stories like that. But I think for the staff, you're working your job that you have trained to do, you've decided to do, but you're constantly living with the fear that you are going to catch that disease and there is no cure. And when you do, you are likely to die of it. And that brings with it a lot of emotional turmoil too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As always, all of the resources that have been used in this episode are in the description of this episode. If you would like to send in your own story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or for $2 a month, you can get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Ever wonder why so many people regain weight after stopping a GLP-1? Up to 40% of the weight lost can come from lean muscle. This weakens the body, slows metabolism, and makes it easier to put the pounds back on, creating a cycle of dependency. Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet offers a drug-free way to maintain results and support long-term metabolic health. In just 5 days, it activates fasting pathways to burn fat, protect muscle, and rejuvenate cells, all while letting you enjoy real food. Get 15% off plus a $40 bonus gift when you subscribe at prolonlife.com/start. That's prolonlife.com/start.